Let's talk about Arabian Adventures by Jeff Grubb, the core rulebook for the Qadim setting. This is a setting inspired by, he says, the historical Arabia, or particularly the Islamic conquest, the fictional Arabia of Scheherazade and genies and other kind of parts of that legend, and finally the Hollywoodization of the setting, Sinbad, most obviously. Very nice Jeff Easley cover with false 3D, like that kind of lumps and bumps to represent his great braces on this Efreet. This is a standalone rulebook, interestingly, as in the actual core setting book is this box set, Qadim Land of Fate, which has a very nice cover as well. By the way, I'm struggling with a cough today. I developed it literally as I started recording, so and I've had to cancel some takes, so we'll see how we go, shall we? It's 160 pages, and it's by Jeff Grubb with Andrea Hayday technically on the back. Andrea Hayday, I think, possibly, if I remember rightly, having added, I think it's that she does additional writing and development, so she's both a development end member of the team, but probably also tidying things up and dotting I's and T's and adding in details from her own research or whatever. There is a reasonably extensive playtesting and review section, most relevantly including a couple of groups, and this is reflected that a lot of the rules here, not all of them, but a lot of the rules they make sense, and they have some sort of functionality. They don't seem completely untested. And there's also some special thanks to a librarian at UCLA, and I think also a scholar or a librarian at the University of Chicago for assistance with Arabic. Grubb has attempted to be pretty serious here, and there is, and I'll observe this here in the overview, there is an intention to be both honest that this isn't a historical representation, that this is just a legendary representation, including via the Hollywood lens, and also there's a fairly regular emphasis on Grubb being interested in this being a setting in which race and gender aren't particularly significant. You can take that or leave that. And certainly the depiction of gender is inconsistent, because he's quite clear also that sometimes in more what he calls moralist areas, things we might think of as more typically conservative Islamic cultural traditions have some sway. But yeah, setting that aside, he's put research in, he's tried to make this serious, and he's also thought a lot about the, in his view, moral presentation. I don't think that's too significant to our general discussion, but for some people it may be of interest. So there's 9 pages, 10 pages of a short overview of Zakara. There is the map. Now, there are full colour maps in the box set, which I hope to review at some point. But this is not a completely unheard of thing to have a standalone rulebook. It's not like Spelljammer, which Grubb also wrote. It is like Forgotten Realms Adventures, the 2nd edition update, I guess, which he wrote with Greenwood, but he's the main writer on. And there is some good setting information, but it's mostly rules. It is like most obviously Oriental Adventures, which the naming of this and the other Adventures books maps to, which is chiefly by Zeb Cook, and which was kind of actually meant to be almost a standalone player's handbook. This is not. This does refer back to the PHB, and yeah, I think it does say somewhere on the back or elsewhere that you need the core books, so that there are any references to the core books. So this isn't standalone from the game, but it's standalone from the setting books, and it's not completely unheard of, but it is rare. Dark Sun has a rulebook and a setting book in the same box set. So does Spelljammer, which Grubb wrote, so does Birthright, so does Ravenloft Realms of Terror, so does Planescape. The chief advantage of splitting it like this, if you want to see it that way, is that there's more space in the rulebook for rules. This is 160 pages. That is about as much as you get in the box sets in terms of some of the box sets at least. I think Planescape goes higher, but you know, say Spelljammer is pretty similar. Total. So here you get a lot more setting, and that was a criticism of Spelljammer I made in my review of that, in fact, that it didn't actually have much setting information. There wasn't much gameable. In that sense, it was closer to just reading the PHP and the 1E PHP and DMG. You get a tiny bit of a sample dungeon, but other than that, you're not getting any adventures, and Spelljammer in that sense was modelled on that. And I think by Dark Sun you have more stuff about the setting, even if it's not as detailed as I'd like. Here, there's obviously an intentional decision to split them so you can have more focus on each. So you get 10 pages on the setting, then you get a 8-page section on character creation. The setting is, as I say, with a few inconsistencies, basically actually around gender specifically. I mean, you can take or leave the flattening out of races, of species. The big thing being that these here, elves and humans share a culture, and so they are more similar to each other in that sense than outlanders coming in. That's the play, that's the take. And it has some value, and it also has some downsides. Over gender, I think the fact that Grubb wants to avoid the you know, female characters getting debuffs to strength and buffs to charisma or whatever, and you know, so it's that sort of cliche, and he wants to push in the other direction, but nonetheless he's at points representing a stratified and traditional society, and he does say tradition is very important. For instance, within this intro chapter, he emphasizes big valuable things: honor, family, purity, hospitality and piety, these core values of society. And that's quite good. It's something which here isn't explored in any depth, but you can see a setting where those are interesting things, where you also add in the Arabian Nights stuff and the Sinbad stuff. So characters, you get some limitations on. It does say Zakara's racial harmony causes a change in ability for dwarves and gnomes. Yeah. So. Yeah, groups, classes and kits, rules, and then rules about something called station. Station is, I don't know if it's obviously inspired by honor from Oriental Adventures. By the way, let's get up a colour illustration. There are a number of colour plates within the book, much like in the 2E PHP. Though they are not Jeff Easley ones within the book, they are by a variety of people, and they are mostly just okay. Richard Bober, Fred Fields, Henry Mayo, Bryn Barnard and Carol Heyer, and Carl Waller does the black and white internal. Station is simpler than honour and simpler to track, and basically does have some of the same uses of how you have to treat those above or below you, and hiding it, which is obviously a Aladdin style important feature in some of those Arabian legends. Now, the next couple of chapters, which are kits and proficiencies, demonstrate or push towards a key distinction about Al-Qadim compared to other D&D settings, including second edition settings, which is that kits are mandatory and proficiencies are integral, non-weapon proficiencies this is. And what's significant here is these are both things people don't necessarily like about second edition. I mean, I do, controversially, much to the derision of my friends, but I do like them. But they are things which are here. There's an attempt to integrate them as not just, oh, well, you could add this if you want, in a way that makes people think, well, I don't really like how it works, I'm not going to do it. But say, no, these are core parts of this experience. This is, I spoke in my Golden Voyages review, which is an adventure for Al-Qadim. I spoke about the fact that you can see Zeb Cook trying to push the limits of what D&D can do in sometimes quite interesting ways, but not always very successful ways. Here, I think, and I know in a sense I'm maybe there's a confirmation bias because I already like these ideas, or I can like these ideas of kits and proficiencies. I think the point is that these things add, these are more successful experiments in pushing the kinds of things D&D can do. Not always successful, but they are successful. After that, by the way, there's a rules section on Perils of Adventure, which is special Zakara rules, an equipment chapter, a chapter on the specialist genie wizards, Shire of the setting, and wizard spells. Quite a long section on wizard spells, about 40 pages on wizard spells. The kits are, is there a single list of them? They're split by the 4 groups, i.e. warrior, priest, wizard, rogue, and though you can still take the normal classes within the meta classes of the 4 meta classes, those are a bit more limited and less important in some respects because of the way in which you end up being defined by your kit. So the warrior kits, you've got Askar, who are town soldiers, corsairs, who are obviously sailors, desert riders, who are nomads and get advantages to camel riding or whatever else. Faris, who are holy warriors, Mamluks, who are slave warriors from slave guilds, mercenary barbarian, and then outland warrior, which there is the outland warrior, the Ajami, and the outland priest all functionally represent any other class or kit combination that isn't represented here from people from outside Zakara, the setting of Qadim. And so there's a bit of a cop out there. Oh, you can have any these. This is this really rich setting with these kits, but really you can still have anything else as long as they're on Outland. And now that does have significant in-game impact as well, of course, but it is a bit of a cop out. There are hindrances such as foreign accent or whatever, social limitations. It's something which you see in terms of the update to. It's mostly in a Dragon magazine article, though there is some of it gets into official books. The 2nd edition update to Oriental Adventures says, look, the presumption is you use a kit on top of a class, and that actually works quite well. I mean, there's a few wiggles to make, and I think in my Oriental Adventures game, I've mildly altered, well, one of them really, mostly the Yakuza to give it back its information gathering ability. But the assumption is you have class, and then the class has, which is more or less, the core 4 classes, which then has a kit attached. Here you have more flexibility for class, though, because the class has to map to a kit, that does limit some things. For instance, you have to be a mage to use the native mage kits. If you're an illusionist or a specialist wizard, you have to be an Ajami, an outland wizard. Priests, you basically have to be clerics, though there is a cleric type that uses the druid experience table and has cleric abilities. You can be a thief or a bard, and you can be a fighter, paladin, or ranger if you're a warrior. So there's some restrictions, but not many. These kits are, and I've never done a proper kit discussion here, I think, because you don't get any in the Dark Sun setting box. You get them in some of the expansions, but maybe in Thri-Kreen, I think I might have spoken about some kits a little bit. But the kits are actually pretty good. I mean, they all follow a similar pattern of. There are some restrictions on them, of course. There are often restrictions on what weapons they can start with. They get a bonus proficiency or 2, and they typically get often a social or occasionally a magical, if they're a casting class, advantage. And then some of them, like Askars, get a social advantage in their hometown, but no special hindrance. For instance, Corsairs. Well, apart from the fact they can't start with medium armour, they have to start with pretty light armour. They get a ranger-like ability to use 2 weapons without penalty, and things like that. And of course, it also matters what bonus proficiencies they have. Corsairs get seamanship. Askars, who are town guards, get reading, writing, plus any 1 general proficiency. They usually also have some forbidden proficiencies at creation. There's a similar pattern across all of these, which you, at a glance, I mean it's an informed glance, these are balanced. These are, generally speaking, there's none that are completely crazy. There are some that are more ornate and intricate, and what you tend to find is, in terms of players using weird kit abilities, which is half the fun of kits, is they are completely unlike later edition prestige classes or subclasses or whatever else, because they tend to warp things in a good way, I think, but they have much more negative as well as positive impacts on the PC and on the world. The more intricate and ornate a kit is, generally speaking, the more complex it is to rule and the more things you have to do to prepare for it. It's a bit like how I'm thinking about the Sonic Power Dream Travel. This is not a kit, but as a parallel, is one where you can have a proficiency check, but it's basically strongly recommended you add obstacles to the dream travel. That is a lot harder to adjudicate in that sense than Dimension Door, which is not a wholly dissimilar power. It's also circumportation. So yeah, Desert Riders are, basically I think they get a free riding proficiency, which can be camel. There's a new riding specialization. So rather than just having general land riding, you can be specialist with a horse or a camel, but therefore not with other land riding animals. The Faris, the Holy Warrior, gets a big bonus, social bonus with his own faith, and can get equipment and stay places and get preferable loans, etc. But has to tithe heavily, which is obviously like a paladin. The Faris, therefore, kind of, there is a way in which the Faris, if we were getting rid of classes and just having a monoclass with a kit, the Faris would be the paladin type. Which is more or less what they do with priests and with mages. The Mamluk is, intelligent, educated, reading, writing, bureaucracy for free. But yeah, obviously, past any organisation, you end up being called upon to do stuff. The Wizard kits, the Sorcerer is the basic mage, and the Sorcerer and the Elemental Mage, which are the two basic mages, really. The Sorcerer is able to specialise, I think, is it in 2 elemental provinces and the universal province, but not in the other 2. So basically there is universal. There's a parallel, by the way, to Dark Sun, which came out before this. This is 92, Dark Sun is 91. There's universal, which is much like Sphere of the Cosmos or whatever. And then there's wind, flame, sand, and sea. The 4 is the current elements, if you will. And so the Sorcerer is very strong at these things and gets a bonus to their chance to learn these spells. Pretty normal stuff for that. And bonus proficiency in disguise of all things. But can't use the other 2. The Elemental Mage, on the other hand, is the Specialist Mage equivalent. And chooses 1 and gets a big bonus to learning those spells and gets control over and resistance to that element, and so on and so forth. But they are very restricted in terms of they can't even use magical items outside of their spheres if they, in terms of their elemental province plus universal. The Shire are genie summoners. There's a whole chapter on them. They are interesting. I'll talk about them a bit more. And the Ajami, the alien wizard, is an outside wizard. And the normal Zakarans don't use spellbooks, basically. They do use spellbooks, but they don't learn the normal kinds of spells. Shire don't use spellbooks at all, but they don't learn spells, the normal lists of spells. They get some spells from the PHB, some from this book. Ajami can use their own spellbooks and their own stuff, but it's basically hard to get spells from outside Zakara, and so on and so forth. Here's another colour illustration. The illustrations, though not remarkable nor amazing, are flavourful. The rogues, the base one is their Sahuk, which also includes Outland Thieves, which is just general burglar type. This is essentially one where there are no adjustments and no hindrances and no benefits. This is just base thief. You have to have a kit. If you're not a base thief, you pick a Saluk, and that includes Outland Thieves. The Barber and the Beggar Thief, the Holy Slayer, and somewhat the Matrude and the Merchant Rogue are much more flavourful, and maybe more like the fighters in that sense, where the fighter classes or the warrior subkits are quite, you can be a Mamluk, you can be a Desert Rider. The Barber is, I feel like there's another product where a Barber is a class or something, I don't know. But yeah, gets healing and herbalism, and if they're a bard, they also, as opposed to a thief, they also get some additional ones. Their thief abilities are manipulated. This is one big thing about these thief kits, is and not all thief kits do this, and most infamously in the Complete Thief's Handbook, the kits are all over the place for that. But here, all the big thief kits manipulate your thief abilities, and barbers, for instance, just get fewer points because they all have some bardic abilities, and and yeah, they are they kind of have certain advantages. For instance, they can use the razor. They get a high list of bonus proficiencies. They're probably best as bards, so that does mean they get fewer points again for thief skills. The beggar thief basically, yeah, again, gets some certain changes, but is very good at disappearing. And the Holy Slayer can be called upon by a grandfather assassin, but gets, you know, all the things you'd expect in terms of. Well, a big thing actually is they're allowed to specialise in a weapon. They get institutional pull, and they get certain modifications and free proficiencies, but they can also specialise in a weapon, which is, I think, essentially unique for a thief, apart from perhaps for the actual assassin kit. I don't remember. The Matrude is a desert thief. The merchant rogue is one of the many merchant or trader classes or types within D&D. I've mentioned this briefly, this general topic briefly, in my Golden Voyages review, but you have the Birthright trader, and you have the Dark Sun trader, and you have other rules for trading in other games. Well, you know, this might be relevant in this adventure or this game, and here they can buy units of stuff. There's rules for creating a company. There's randomized monthly trading checks about its value going up and down. It can go bust. They can hire a chief clerk, so on and so forth. That's their main advantages. They can run a business and make money out of it. And the Rawoon is the core, the official bard, you know, the official desert bard, who just is, well, can remove the evil eye, which is a special thing. They get a special rule we'll get to, and is better at certain bardic things. Now the priests, there are 6 priest kits, 3 of which are to do with the organised churches, clerics of order, and 3 of which are clerics of, they're the free priests. So the clerics of order, you've got pragmatists, ethoists and moralists, and this is essentially a scale of how rigid, or in some would use the word conservative, they are. This is not a subtle presentation of religion. It sort of maybe touches on the idea that, yeah, pragmatists are wandering healers, ethoists are maybe more like town priests, and moralists are monks and bureaucrats and so on within the hierarchy. And that's not a bad distinction necessarily. I'm not saying it's a good one either. I'm just saying it's fine. But there's still a sense that pragmatists are the nicest and moralists are the meanest, and some of the powers track to that, which is not necessarily good. I think it's lazy, but I think, yeah, they get slightly different sphere access, and they get slightly different organisational access. That's the big differences there. The free priests are a bit more varied. The Hakima is able to perceive the truth about certain things. That's her big special ability, and she has to be female. Also has fairly limited magic due to that. Has very cheap proficiency access, which, given proficiencies a core, is good. She doesn't pay anything extra for getting stuff from other groups. The Kahin, the idol priest, is a druid-like class or subclass in this case, and yeah, it is okay. It is not quite as good as the Druid's Handbook. I think really opens up druids quite a lot, and here there is some kind of equivalent of Archdruid stuff. You become an aged master with special abilities, which are quite cute, but that is when you're 16th level. And the Mystic is just, I think, a bit of a wandering monk with, yeah, people being very lost, and they're more like a desert prophet, so they don't always get on with free ordered priests and then outland priests. So the kits are, there's a lot of flavour there. You can see different tropes coming up from both the Islamic conquest stuff, from the Arabian Night stuff, and from our Hollywoodization. You know, the Corsair is much more Sinbadian, and will certainly be relevant in Golden Voyages with a free seamanship proficiency. In terms of proficiencies, they all seem to work. Again, there's a sort of a glance thing there of having run enough games, you think that sounds like it works. There's any proficiency. The key with proficiencies is that rolling a single die is not itself interesting gameplay, and that's the same with an attack roll, by the way. Just rolling a die, it's fun, yeah. Like as Norm would say, it's the hope that gets you. Yes, it's exciting to roll dice and see if you succeed, but gameplay-wise, it's irrelevant. You know, it's not the core decision you make is prior to and after. It's just a determinant of that, but the actual gameplay is around it, if you know what I mean. And proficiencies, an obvious flaw, and this becomes much worse in the D20 era, where you have big unified abilities tied to increasingly important abilities. Unified proficiency, and skills connected to all the ever more important abilities, is that you break the game by rolling a die and saying, okay, well, we don't have to do stuff anymore. And it's not very exciting, it's not very interesting. Non-weapon proficiencies are interesting if, two things. One, they're specialised and focused and are about giving this character, but virtually no other character who'll ever be at your table. I mean, some are more common, obviously, but you get the idea. A lever. In this situation, they have a lever. Now, it's not actually worth everyone taking herbalism and healing at 2 slots each or whatever, because the advantages are not minor. Those are a very good combination. Healing combined with herbalism is a good healing buff, and if you're in a proper time records and recovery campaign, which is what I run, that's what I run, then it's really good. But if everyone has those, all your slots are taken up doing that, and you don't have ancient history. The other thing is, so one, they have to be specialised, they have to be something that player can do and makes them valuable, and that they can make a decision to use at the right time. One thing is that these don't tend to have strong costs imposed, and that means that you need to be able to limit their effect. The other necessity is that they are quick to resolve. And there are a few proficiencies I've run into, I'm like, oh, we're going to have to spend 5 minutes doing this. I like those less, and I'm less likely to encourage their use, or I'm more likely to mod them. You essentially want it to be something a player can say, this seems like a good opportunity to do this. They roll a die, it's a pass-fail. Much like, it's like a thief skill in that sense. It's the equivalent of a thief skill in terms of how it functions in the game, in the gameplay cycle, in the core mechanical kind of direction of the game. So with that said, most of them, things like genie law is fine for that. Bureaucracy, and some of them like, begging, bureaucracy, debate, display weapon prowess, all have a few mechanics involved, and there's a sense of they're meant to be aimed, all of them in fact, including display weapon prowess, at the social adventure. They're the city adventure kind of things, and display prowess is the idea that you might scare off. It's Aladdin, waving a sword around trying to impress the guards, that sort of thing. And as long as you keep those, one, the player is rewarded for having made a sacrifice to choose this proficiency, two, it can't be abused, it's not so powerful it fixes everything, it's very specialised, and three, you can resolve it quickly, so the player says, this is the right time to use the thing I've sacrificed to get, a bit like using a scroll or whatever to access thing, or whatever, though that is a consumable, so it's allowed to be more powerful than a proficiency, and then it's over quickly. And certainly with bureaucracy, debate, and so on, I'd do that. Grooming, similarly, grooming is improves reaction from people of the same race. I think that's interesting. That there's flaws, of course, with that. You could always say, why not always do that? And again, imposing time costs and imposing durations. You're only well groomed for so long matters. It is 2 days for grooming, for instance, and it takes an hour. That's relatively low cost for a +2 bonus for your own race. So, question mark about that. Haggling, there are haggling rules. It's actually not a bad minigame. I won't go into it here, but it's not a bad minigame, and it can be resolved quickly. It is essentially an opposed die roll. So, and it connects to the equipment lists in Qadim, which is you get a high price, a normal price, and a low price, and your haggling takes it up or down. And it is a trope, but it is a true trope. It is a trope founded on some fact, if not total fact, about parts of Levantine culture that haggling matters. I speak from experience. Metalworking, and the horse and camel specializations round that out. You then get rules on armor. This is a parallel to Dark Sun, but not so much. You don't get. There is some stuff about water loss and so on, but it's not so much about that as about if you wear too heavy armor, including combining it with shields, you start taking penalties to hit. But you can use bucklers, you can use tiny shields, which I think virtually everyone who cares about this stuff already mods in, but which is a one-use around shield, and they do not count as a shield for the table, the useful table here. The black and white illustrations, by the way, are generally fine. Again, nothing exciting. Desert survival gives you rules for dehydration and wind and sand, and this is parallel to Dark Sun, and it's pretty similar in terms of the requirement for water, and it gives rules about animal requirement for water, which is like somewhat erratic in Dark Sun. It's not unified because you get a variety of special rules about it often across monster entries, but it uses a con loss system, which is one of the ways in which AD&D handles this. There are different ways, but I think con loss is pretty much the most common, because isn't that also one of the ways that starvation is penalised in the Wilderness Survival Guide. Wind and sand is basically if you're mostly about if you're covered in sand. It's dealing with the fact there are lots of situations where you might end up covered in sand, and given the number of spells, there are too many spells about sand. That's useful. Then one is not a special rule, an optional rule, the other is, but they are both basically the optional weird rules about the setting. Very much trading again on the media, both the traditional media and the American modern media about this. Calling upon fate, you can attempt to get a lucky break. A percentage chance is applied, and yeah, you've got a basic 2% chance of fate intervening on your behalf, a 5% chance of it going against you, but if you're a cleric of order, you get more assistance, basically, that you need to donate if it does help you. And this gives you not a solution, not like people are attacking you and they all drop dead, but rather it gives you an opportunity. You can suddenly try to do that if you notice something that could be toppled to stop them, that sort of thing. Fate's response, and the evil eye is a type of curse which can apply if you how did that even come up? I feel like I've read this. Yeah, basically it's if you are not humble and modest about things, and if you don't kind of act, which is a weird one because one, it won't come up that often, and two, it requires players to think, as it means players have to engage socially in a way that not every gamer is going to be comfortable with. It also is the result of Cause Evil Eye, which is a spell, so that's more relevant. Out the Bazaar gives a detailed equipment list, still missing standard rations. You will not get standard rations in a second edition player's handbook side thing until the revised 2E, which comes with more or less alongside the player option, DM option range. It's 2.5, though it's not heavily changed. Player option is, of course, much very different at points. But you don't get standard rations on the list, you only have dry rations, but you get a bunch of new weapons, you get a bunch of new bits of clothing. There's maybe too much detail about the different kinds of traditional Arabic clothes, but there we are. New weapons is fun, none of them super required, though things like the cutlass or the great scimitar are fun. The cutlass gives you a +1 benefit while parrying, so thematic. And armour is, you get lamella, which is lighter and less costly than standard scale. And then you get, the next chapter is Shire. So Shire are the biggest remaining thing to talk about because the spells are, I should be able to go over fairly quickly. Shire are a new type of mage. They're not a spellbook mage, like I said. They start with they summon a familiar, and I think you just start with one, but you start with a gen or a gen, a small, low intelligence, I feel like, genie, who are called, there is a list of what they are like, yep. Efritikin, Maradans, Dalanin and Jinlings, and they have low intelligence, AC 5, movement rate of 9, between 8 and 12 inches tall. Their Thaco is half their, the Thaco of a monster is half their master's level and hit dice, and their hit dice are half their master's level. And they inflict 1d6 point of damage and of small size. So they can kind of fight you know, that's not most of the main advantages of them. Air gens can fly. Fire gens can produce flame at will, which is pretty good. Water gens can breathe underwater and have a swim speed at 12. And earth gens do double damage, 2d6. That actually probably makes them the least useful, because unless you're a reasonably high level Shire, if you're like an 8th level Shire and you have a 4th level gen going around punching people for 2d6 damage, that's not that bad, you know, that's not the worst thing in the world. Or is it 5th level? You need to get a Thaco improvement maybe. But yeah, the big thing about the gen is that you can ask them to go and get spells. They need to be spells that are in the back of the book on the local spell list. Do I have a picture of gen? I mean, there's a that is, I think, probably meant to be a represented gen there. But yeah, they can go and try to find you spells, find access to spells, and that can be outland magic or priestly magic, but there's a big percentage penalty to the chance to find it. A tough thing is that at the start is that you have a base chance of 90 or more always fails, that's fine. 50% base chance. Level of Shire is plus 5% each level, minus 10 for each level of the spell being sought. Spell is general knowledge, plus 10, that's an Appendix A one. And then if they're repeating a failed task, or if it's priestly magic or not a common spell. This does mean at first level, let's say at first level you try to get a common spell, your first level spell and a first level Shire, you only have a 55% chance of getting it, and the Shire can cast the spell within 3 turns. Now, what this should immediately make you think is basically Shires do become quite powerful. They are not very powerful at first level, and I think it feels like there's a design problem there, that you have a 55% chance of getting a spell, and it takes a certain number of rounds. You can technically ask for stuff above your own experience level to cast. That's one of the interesting things, but it takes more time. If a native wizard with the same experience level could not normally cast the desired spell, it takes 1d6 turns plus 1 turn per level of the spell. So 3rd level spell is going to take, you know, on average 6 or 7 turns to find it, and then you'll have and you've got a 55, well, whatever it is, it won't be 55% at that point, but yeah, it does mean that you can get some Hail Marys, though the swing is big on getting these abilities. I think you're going to have Shire players who are frustrated by the inability to get spells, and that's not an optimal experience. There are things like some fun stuff, like you can annoy gods by requesting spells. The gens themselves, the other thing is, of course, you have a chance of getting spells, and 2, you have an easy way of getting a familiar who has a special ability. Jinlings being able to fly places, and I mean, they are able to carry stuff, for instance. Maridans being able to swim, could potentially go, you know, swim around and look at something. They can scout for you, they can do stuff for you. They can fight for you if needs be, though if they die, that has some you know, downsides, the kind of ones you'd expect from various kinds of summoning rules. If you've read any summoning rules in 2e, it generally hurts in the future about getting new helpers. 3rd level, you can recognise genie work. 5th level, you can call upon the Jan, who are sort of minor genies who live on the Prime, to come and help you, and they may help you if they're within range. 7th level, you get protection against elemental attacks, all elemental attacks. 9th level, you can call upon a genie. At this point, 9th level Shires, though there is a whole thing about having to agree a contract with them, 9th level Shire, and you can't require them to cast wishes. 9th level Shires, oh no, at 9th level you possibly can ask them to do a wish if it is, oh yeah, unless they can figure a way to use it to their advantage. 11th level, you can bind a genie and you create a contract, which can't include wishes, generally speaking. So 9th or 11th level Shires, suddenly you've got enormous power. Essentially, as a 5th level spell equivalent, at 9th level, you're able to get a genie to do something for you, a specific task. At 11th level, as a 6th level spell, sorry, essentially you're able to bind a genie into a long period of helping you do stuff. 13th level Genie Prison, 15th level Elemental Travel, 17th level be received by noble genies, and so on and so forth. So the Shire is, I like the Shire, and I'll hopefully look at the Shire handbook. I like the Shire a lot. I like I like different magic ideas. It's what I like Silencists for this reason, as a different magic system. I like that it's based on genies. I like the idea, the core idea. At low levels, you don't have spells. You have a gen, and that gen can get you spells, and that gen also has another ability that will help you. That's good. I think the actual core mechanic there probably bears some. I would have to really see it in action a bit and see how players reacted to struggling to get spells, given there's also an expiry. That's one of the big things. If it's a 24-hour expiry, I think, and a player could have one spell of such a kind, that would probably feel okay to most first level players, because they only get one spell anyway, and they can't guarantee what spell they get, but they could get a big spell. You need some internal limits, because they could be like, well, I'll just try every third level spell on the list. That would be annoying. You know, you're having to then deal with a first level character who will, generally speaking, statistically break things enough to get a really powerful spell. So yeah, there's a comsar on that, you know, but it's basically a good idea that possibly needs a little bit of tweaking. Wizard spells, wizard spells in these things where you have, I mean, this is, as I say, it's 40 pages. You can have a lot of fun working out what cool spells there are. I think, sorry, there's the last colour plate in the book. There are a lot of spells here, and there are a lot of good spells. Interesting that, ironically perhaps, or I don't know, perversely, contrarily, though I think finding out new spells and being excited by the fact, like, because the thing about spells is, in the AD&D meta, including both first and second, even if second is a lot less pure, there's a lot more stuff out there, is that these things are big levers. They require big costs often, and they've got or they have very specific limitations, but they are big levers. Even at first level, you can have big lever spells, and that's what's exciting about them. And so reading spell sections gives you ideas. Oh, I could do this cool thing with this. I, contrarily or perversely, don't necessarily enjoy reading spell sections because I find them repetitive. You're reading a lot of spells, a lot of the same information. But the overview is that there are basically slightly too many spells, especially stuff around sand. That sounds like weird to complain about. It's, you know, the land of fate. It's Zakara. It's a desert land on the whole. But essentially just there's lots of spells which are slightly more powerful versions of previous spells, which is fine. Or they're kind of like, oh, this is another way to move sand. That's the biggest thing. There's several that just are about moving sand, and that's, though they're kind of fun at points, they're not that exciting. But I would say in general there's a lot of good stuff here. And particularly, there's some odd stuff. Like there's a couple of flame ones which are divination spells about which you can use in interrogation to determine whether something someone says is the truth or not, and it gives you a signal if they're not. The high level one actually punishes them for lying, and it's interesting because the lower level one, the first level one, is in their own opinion are they lying, and the high level one is in your opinion are they lying. So it does point out that, of course, only a true sociopath would go around actively disbelieving stuff that the person being interrogated says. But yeah, there's also a whole section on sea spells, things like, I mean, just in first level spells, you've got float and cool strength, which prevents sunstroke and so on, and sea sight, which you can see beneath the waves, and waterbane, which keeps an object from getting wet. Those are just the first level sea spells. There's a real sense that sea is meant to be something that you do in this game, that you are going to go around sailing. Now, it's interesting, this book does not have extra naval rules. I don't think there's anything extra in Land of Fate, particularly on that either. But you do get some of that in Golden Voyages, which was the first module published. And there's also, that's in the south of Zakara. In the north of Zakara, Corsairs of the Great Sea cover some similar stuff. So the idea that you might regularly be at sea certainly matches the thematic stuff, and there is spell support for it that is generally quite interesting. And what I would say is, aside from complaining about there's too many spells about moving sand, I hate sand, to quote a great man, most of the spells are exactly what I like in AD&D spell design generically. Whether or not they're individually successful, you know, most of them seem decent. At high levels, as normal you'd suspect they are less tested. You tend to be able to see more grey area and more need to judge things. But say, you know, they're fairly specialised. There's a whole spell about making you buoyant in water. There are spells about covering your tracks in the sand, or making a dagger, an equivalently magical dagger out of, well, or sword out of sand. And then there's a slightly high level one, which the wind sphere can similarly do. Being able to use, Banish Dazzle is a second level spell, which, for instance, dismisses not just mirages and generally being blinded by the sun, but any 5th level illusion or less. And you get a bonus against colour spray, fire charm, and similar visual spells. That's a really powerful second level spell, but it's very specific, obviously. So this is the thing, I like powerful things, big levers with limitations, basic. And that's one thing, is things either taking multiple rounds to cast. Very few of that, to be fair, there's very little of that here. Casting time tends to be lazily put in as nearly always, like casting time is segments equal to the spell level. That's not as interesting, but basically when you have things that have certain durations or certain limitations on use, or they have to be concentrated on or whatever, or they dispel illusions and mirages but not any other kind of magic. So yeah, there's a lot of this. This is a solid spell section with the one caveat, and there's lots of twists on common spells that are quite fun, such as Death Smoke is a wind spell, which is a little bit like Cloud Kill. You can eventually summon certain kind of pseudo things. You can turn yourself into, basically at high level, the one thing about the high level stuff is, one, it looks less tested, but two, you do get some very fun ideas, like a sound staff which sucks sound into it for 60 days and gives bonuses against magic and attacks in that context, and then can be after that used as a a weapon which can knock doing power word stun, 2d6 power word stun charges. You can create a bit of shade. Life Proof creates a place for someone. It's I think it's the recipient. I think it can be anyone then, possibly. But their body can endure as much damage as it likes, really. There are certain things that can still kill it, certain spells and so on, but can take as much physical damage as it likes, and it will stay alive. However, for every -10 of damage it takes, it becomes more and more undead looking, and only recovers once it gets back up to 1 hit point. Sunstone is just a very powerful magic missile. Water form, you become water. Sandworm, you become a little sandworm who can has a burrowing speed of 12, and AC 6 and Thaco 17, inflicting 3d4 damage. Cleanse Water, which can be reversed into Pollute Water. Unleash Monolith, which is creating a massive elemental who you don't actually control, like a 30 HD elemental lasting 1 turn per level. And at 9th level, Life Water, which is a healing water, and that's fine. It's fine actually at that point, because Wish, of course, can do some similar things. Life Water is more flexible than Wish because it's fungible. But the idea that you can replicate spells that aren't common in the wizard oeuvre, Life Water is like that. That's fun. Maelstrom is just drawing through elemental water. Sandform is just a crazy fun one that someone can be paralyzed, doesn't they? Except this is a voluntary thing. They essentially become paralyzed and have a sandform that can go up to 100 miles away and can do it can do anything less exacting than lockpicking, sewing, etc. It can carry things, it can fight, it can talk hoarsely. So you can go on adventures in his sand form, and then so it's fun. It's lots of good ideas in here. It's a rule book rather than a setting book. You get ideas about a setting. There's an implied setting, just like there is in PHB and DMG. And it's a rich implied setting, and I like many of the kits. I think there's very little that is absolute blow away. I think Jeff Grubb, probably I suspect there's a certain kind of underratedness in the sense that he's just a forgotten early 2E man in a kind of understandably unpopular era who just made products like this and Spelljammer, stuff that's famous but not necessarily amazing. And I think in this case you've got something like that. It's good. It's it coupled with the setting, coupled with a DM willing to make the setting sing, is actually a solid rules basis, much like the Spelljammer books are, the core Spelljammer set is. But you wouldn't want to buy, you know, I guess as a rulebook for your own Arabian setting, stealing ideas, this is going to be fine on its own. But as a way into playing Al Qadim, it's not going to be fine. You're going to have to get other stuff, basically. Anyway, if you've read this or used it, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you next time.